Thanks everyone for joining a new episode of the Holistic Selling podcast. I am pleased to welcome MaryAnn Holder-Browne as a guest today. MaryAnn is a highly regarded marketing executive in the world of B2B SaaS with 2 decades of experience in multiple marketing roles across a number of software companies. We had the pleasure of working together, and I greatly appreciated the alignment and collaboration that we enjoyed in creating and executing lead generation campaigns together. A great example of marketing and sales working seamlessly together to optimize results. MaryAnn, welcome. Please take a minute to introduce yourself.
Everything that Bernard said is true. And we worked together for a few years in the supply chain B2B tech space. And I'm just happy to be here today to talk through what I see as the future for marketing and what marketers are facing in today's turbulent times.
Yes, absolutely. Just to frame the conversation, holistic selling is a revenue acceleration system that is built on orchestrating all company functions and processes to enable your frontline team members to deliver extraordinary experiences and outcomes to your customers and prospects at every touch point, which will boost your sales results and drive your customer success. Marketing obviously plays a critical role in enabling your frontline team members. So once again, MaryAnn, thanks for joining to share your insights with us today. You mentioned turbulent times, so I'd like to get back to that. We're facing indeed turbulent times in SaaS B2B right now, and as a result, marketing is changing very fast. So how do you see this impacting market organizations?
That's a great question, Bernard. We're seeing a lot of reallocation of budget and marketing spend, and really a more intense focus. If there wasn't one before, there certainly is one now on that performance accountability. For every marketing dollar spent, there should be revenue alignment with those marketing dollars. And companies are really looking at figuring out where redundancies are, figuring out where marketing can be held more tightly accountable for those revenue outcomes and not just delivering leads. So marketing is really becoming the instigator and the promoter for revenue. So that's one of the major things that we're seeing out in the market space today.
I agree with you. As a matter of fact, through hard times, B2B SaaS companies tend to reduce their marketing budget. So how, as a marketer, can you convince a CFO or CEO to continue to spend in marketing as a revenue driver?
Well, really, it's that accountability, looking at what your tech stack looks like, looking at what your talent stack looks like, and then ultimately, the C-suite, really, the main driver there is going to be what the revenue bands look like at the end of the day. How are we attaining our revenue? What is our selling model, and how are we able to achieve those great business outcomes? And
Yeah.
marketing has been a great arbiter of brands and really accelerating companies. But in today's modern era, marketers are faced with an even bigger challenge because those are still table stakes that marketers must adhere to when it comes to having a seat at the exec table. But they also need to be aware of the changes that are happening within the roles of marketing because there are some massive changes underway, not just with AI, but with organizations.
Do you care to expand on what some of those changes might be?
Yeah, I would love to. I mentioned budget and restraints in that capacity. Companies are really looking at how they can better align. And the age old question that all of us are facing in the past 4 years is that how is AI going to impact us? And really, AI is the change agent. It's not that it's going to be here to replace jobs. That is nothing that I've seen in any of the discussions that I've had with marketers or with my peers in the space. It's simply a means to ameliorating and changing the role of marketing because now we have so much at our fingertips that can be automated that the role of the marketer really becomes that of chief storyteller or chief creative scientist, really coming up with the marriage between creativity and revenue and business outcomes. So that's a completely different skill set. And I like to call it the rise of the English major. The liberal arts students of today are the leaders of marketing tomorrow. And I say this because those students will have the capacity to become those storytellers and to be able to prompt AI to really create the best in class of marketing campaigns, to really look at what business outcomes should look like. And I foresee that skill sets are really going to be changing dramatically in the next 5 to 10 years in regards to that. Maybe a
Yeah,
few less business majors and a few more liberal arts majors.
I agree. As a recent article I read on entrepreneur.com said that in the age of AI, storytelling might just be the most powerful leadership skill we have left. As technology accelerates, the article said, a paradox has emerged. The faster we automate, the more we crave what only humans can give, meaning, empathy, and connection. So isn't the CMO, the chief marketing officer, becoming the chief storytelling officer?
Fully agree with that. And I think that is the most interesting dimension to the next iteration of chief marketing officers, mainly because you'll meet every type of CMO that's out there. You know, you'll have dramatically data-driven individuals who maybe have a slight characteristic of creativity, but now really honing into that, leaning into the storytelling is going to be mission critical. Becoming the chief storyteller is really hypercritical to success because, as you mentioned, Bernard, people buy from people. And the ability to tell that story and to tell it in such a compelling way is really a humanistic trait that AI can never take away from us. So, regardless of the tools that are in place now that are aiding and abetting our day to day lives, really at the end of the day, the ability to connect, to be human, to have that empathetic touch, those are going to be the differentiators for marketing leaders and leaders in general in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the same article said when leaders learn how to turn their stories into strategy, growth happens in real time, trust deepens, teams can move faster on projects, and retention increases. So clearly, storytelling is key. And you and I have seen this, and I think it's very profound in the way that the marketing team is structured. We've seen marketing team very focused on lead generation process and conversion process and really being focused on metrics and processes. And while that is important, I think the part that might have been missing in the past is a greater emphasis on building customer stories, on building sales plays that are compelling for the audience, and putting more resources against content creation and content enablement versus just enabling the marketing process. Would you agree?
I would greatly agree with that statement. And the fact is that demand generation will always exist, but there's going to be a variance on demand generation. And the idea that content now, what would have normally taken us probably 3, 5, 6 months to a year to create a whole compendium of marketing assets, we're now able to create those much more rapidly, which also means that we can tweak our stories more rapidly. So, really, those demand generation programs become chapters of storytelling over time where we can iterate, we can campaign, and we can campaign very quickly. We can make adjustments in real time. Whereas in the past, we might have been stuck on a campaign for a week, a month, a quarter at a time, or even a year at a time. And now we can iterate much more rapidly due to some of the tools that we have at our fingertips.
Totally agree. Come to think about my 25 years experience in B2B SaaS software across 7 different companies. In every case, we were always short of compelling customer stories that we could use to create interest from prospects or sustain a sales cycle through the end. And when we did have those customer stories, they were pretty cut and dry. What is the problem? What is the solution? What are the benefits? And they did not lend themselves to great storytelling. So isn't there an art there, Marianne, to actually totally transform the art really of creating better customer stories that the customer facing team members, the sales executives, the account managers can use to really create demand?
Absolutely. And, just to hear the stories that your peers and your colleagues in your industry, no matter what your industry is, to hear what they're facing is tantamount to success just because everyone wants to hear what others are encountering, what solutions are working for them. And that storytelling then gives a sense of trust as well. That sense of trust is really one of the most critical factors. And as chief storytellers, chief marketers, we have to be able to establish that trust with our clients and customers. And that's part of what I would say is the art and science of that storytelling. And the storytelling must really have an underlying layer of trust and respect for those who are in the buying cycle.
How do you see AI changing the marketing landscape, especially in the context of this conversation about storytelling?
Well, as I mentioned before, that the MarTech stack has changed. Our toolbox of tools has changed enormously. And it has really made things, let's say, the pace has picked up and we're able to iterate more rapidly. We're able to create with fewer resources on hand, which is good and bad, right? Marketing organizations may be a little bit leaner than they were in the past. With the new tool sets, marketers are able to really iterate and tell those stories in real time, and as well to enable the sales team to establish those lines of trust with prospects and customers and to really establish themselves as someone who brings the brand to life. Whereas before it might have all been just a digital presence. And now the trusted human voice, the storytelling, all is one compilation to help customers see a brand come to life.
Yeah, what strikes me, to build on your point, is the role of AI in creating personalized and contextual and messaging that resonates with prospects and customers. The problem with it that I have seen is a lot of those AI tools are very shallow. The personalization that they create is not very compelling. And I think the reason for that is that the content that those AI engines is leveraging is not deep enough. We need to build more stories that are compelling for customers by persona, by industry, so that when AI creates those messages, it is built on compelling stories that are embedded into the personalization of those messages to compel the prospects and the customers to engage with the brands. It always goes back to everybody has an AI engine that does personalization, but the true differentiator is upstream from that AI engine. The true differentiator is in the quality of the content and the data that you feed into that AI engine, which goes back to the role of the marketing team is really to create those compelling stories.
Well, and it also goes into every aspect of data and data lakes and data pools of sovereign data for your company. You know, there's a lot of, as I mentioned earlier about digital trust and the effects on the customer. If you're only as good as your data lake and the well that your company is drawing from. So it's up to the marketers, it's up to the executives to ensure the integrity of our core messages that's intact within our four walls so that those messages become refined and the same and really enable a brand to come across in a very consistent way with the added layers of a creative story on top of it.
Yeah. And maybe you can chime in on this as well, but I've worked with a number of marketing organizations, obviously, throughout my career. And content creation always seemed to have been done by just one single individual. Like the marketing team could have 20 people or 30 people, yet content creation was one person. I think that needs to change. We need to allocate more resources against content creation that we used to just because storytelling is the key differentiator in creating empathy and connection with the prospects. So, do you see a similar trend in the contacts you've had in the industry?
I do, and I see more and more emphasis on just being able to evolve the messages very quickly, which really goes back to what I said before, and that being that if your core messages are sound, your core compendium for your company, it's much easier for your marketers and or your salespeople and or your executives to create core content that's in line with what your brand equity value is saying and that really resonates out in the marketplace. So, to your point, there are more and more creators, and I see AI forcing us to become creators. We're all now creative scientists or creators that can put content out into the ecosphere. So those tools are enabling us to be able to do that. And really, it's marketing's job just to make sure that the core values are there, that the integrity remains intact, and that trust is always established.
Very true. I like the emphasis on trust. And to your point about content creation, we're moving quickly from the world of SEO to what is now called AEO, because a lot of people aren't visiting websites anymore to get those stories. They just type in prompts on a search engine like ChatGPT, an AI search engine. And so it's very, very important to brands to create more content in social media so that they can be found, if you will, as a response to those questions. And I've read somewhere recently that it's a big fear of marketers that less and less people visit their websites and more people use the likes of ChatGPT to find their brand. So have you seen a similar trend on your side?
I have, and it's what all marketers are facing right now. I would say that it's not completely figured out, but what we have figured out in terms of being found by the in-app searches is that if we can maintain enough domain expertise, which means publishing content that answers a lot of questions, because people don't search normally on just parameters, tell me about XYZ company. They may search on a topic around supply chain or around operations or business optimization or whatever the titles are. And it's really the marketer's job to ensure that we have the right content embedded into our website, embedded into our social content, embedded into our assets that are out there on the web to lead things back to our own website. And yes, traffic could be affected in some certain ways because people are doing their research in app. But for the most part, interested buyers are going to land on your website. So it's really tantamount and paramount to success to have the content embedded into our websites.
Indeed. It's also interesting to consider that the traditional role of marketing is twofold: build a brand and create demand. And those things tend to blur today because you need to create content that will, at the same time, build the brand and create demand, because that content will find its way into those ChatGPT like tools and will sustain brand building while also enabling those who are looking for a solution to find your brand and thereby creating lead generation. So it all goes back to content creation as a means to really build a brand and create demand at the same time.
It makes sense, and really, I think gone are the days of a lot of gated content just because we need to be freely giving of content and really ensuring that we're the educators for a brand or for a topic, a subject matter area that's relevant to our brand. So the idea that we would do a traditional drive to web download assets may not always be what our goal is at this stage. Because you'll see that visitors to your website tend to be a little bit more sophisticated because they've learned about your brand and your offering already through an in-app search. So the call to action may be completely different. It may just be talk to a service rep, talk to someone who can help you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I hadn't thought about this that way, but you're right. The days of gated content, I think, are counted because um, we need to really come across as trusted advisors. We need to tell our audience insights about things that they may not be aware of to create that trust and to get our prospects to engage with us and our brands. And so gated content is contrary to that. And I think you're right. We need to give freely. We need to share those insights, knowing that the customers are doing 70% of the work by themselves in the dark funnel before approaching an organization. It's really important to feed their buying process along that 70% to ensure that they can find the brand and they can start trusting the brand by the content they find by themselves. Have you seen a similar transformation?
I have, and that is that buyers are more and more educated in general, and they have been even prior to AI. But now with AI and in-app searches, we're finding that usually that decision makers have come to an even more narrowed conclusion by the point that they're reaching your website, because they've had an opportunity to really research and see the entire marketscape for your particular offering. So I've had several brands that have noticed this along the way, that by the time someone reaches their site, they're typically asking for a contact us form. So it's actually driving inbound a lot more.
Yes. But to find your website, they're going to find your website because your name appeared on some sort of chat GPT search first. Isn't that now the logical path? You're going to go to chat GPT or Perplexity or another LM tool. You're going to ask a question. You're going to get an answer. The answer might include your brand. You're then going to have a link to your website that then will enable you to fill in a contact me form. But I think typically moving again from SEO to AEO, a lot more inbound is going to come to you through LLM searches versus going directly to the website, especially for market segments where there is a large number of companies offering solutions.
It still boils down to understanding your ICP really well. And that's where, even as marketers, with some of the tools and some of the research that we can now get our hands on in terms of buying cycles and buying needs, we can see a lot of synthetic data trends that happen across an industry, for instance, that enables us to really hone in on key trends, changes, and or different perceptions within the buying centers and buying cycles.
Yeah. No, great insights, Marianne. That's fantastic. To summarize the conversation, we talked about the fact that the turbulent times that are impacting the B2B SaaS industry today are transforming marketing. And we talked about obviously the increased accountability of marketing in terms of aligning with revenue. But we also talked about the fact that marketing more and more is becoming a storytelling organization. And the power of storytelling in creating stories that are compelling an audience to engage with the brand and being able to publish those stories where the prospects and the customers live so that they can find your brand by doing their own searches and being able to trust your brand by what they're going to be reading on their own before they engage with your sales or account management organization. We talked about the role of AI being critical in creating personalization of messaging, yet that personalization, once again, depends on the depth and the quality of the messaging you would have created that will feed the personalization layer so that you can create that differentiation in your personalization. We talked about the chief marketing officer becoming a chief storytelling officer. That is more true now than ever before. So great insights all together, Marianne. I appreciate you sharing those. Now, I'd like to give you the last word on the podcast today in terms of what is your call to action for the audience? What do you see that they should take away from the podcast today?
Really in honing in on those storytelling skills, realizing that the skills that you had yesterday, they're not defunct, but definitely we need to be able to change rapidly and adapt to this brave new world that we're in with AI. Also, that at the end of the day, it's human to human that's going to sell a product. So, really, back to the chief storytelling theme, it's best to have that human to human touch within all of your marketing programs.
I could not have said it any better. So, Marianne, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights with the audience today.
Thanks.